Alan English here, actor, writer and autism trainer. This is another autism tutorial, and in this tutorial I want to discuss the language of autism, with particular emphasis on the term Aspergers Syndrome. This has come in for a lot of scrutiny in recent years. I have now redone my series of tutorials as autism tutorials, whereas previously it was Asperger's Syndrome tutorials. Now this is in keeping in line with the current terminology. I will discuss this as well as other aspects of the language of autism over the next 10 minutes. Now first off, I want to discuss the terms ASD, Autistic Spectrum Disorder, and ASC, Autistic Spectrum Condition. Now there are some people on the autistic community who want to abolish the term ASD, Autistic Spectrum Disorder, as it is too negative, and instead use the term Autistic Spectrum Condition to convey a more positive and rounded impression about autistic people in society. Now for me, these two terms are interchangeable, and medical professionals who use them have to make a judgment call as to which one to apply to a specific individual. The reality is that for many autistic people, being autistic can feel, and often is, disabling. When you have challenges communicating with people and adapting to a complex world around you, being autistic can feel like a disorder. Now, some of this is down to our personalities and experiences, but a lot of it is down to a global society that isn't really designed or built for us and is still trying to get used to the idea of autistic people. Incidentally, I use the term autistic people as opposed to people with autism. A person is their autism, however they come across as individuals, and it is not something that exists separately from us. It is us. We are our autism. We are autistic people. Now I want to look at the terms high functioning and low functioning. Now I am in agreement with those people who insist that those terms should really be abolished. These terms are misleading and they are oversimplified. Autistic people can be high functioning in a lot of ways, fluent in speech and vocabulary, but yet find it hard to interact with society, holding down a job and forming close personal relationships. These two things can coexist quite easily in the same autistic person. The term mild autism can also be misleading. It usually means other people see it as mild, or see autistic person's autism as mild, when in fact the autistic person that they deal with or they know might be working very hard to communicate with others and mask the autistic parts of themselves, such as stimming and meltdowns, that can stand out to other people and draw unnecessary attention to themselves. It can also mislead parents into thinking that autism is something that you can grow out of or hide sufficiently in order to appear normal or to lead a normal life. However, for a lot of autistic people, not all autistic people, but for a lot of autistic people, this is unrealistic. The challenges for autistic people in adapting to society can be very varied, but no autistic person, whatever their challenges, experiences their autistic state of being mildly. It always affects you on a deeply personal level. Now, let us look at the term Asperger's Syndrome and why it has come in for some serious re-evaluation over the last few years. Now, Hans Asperger, from whom we get the term Asperger's Syndrome, was an Austrian child psychiatrist who was born in Heilbronn, Austria in 1906. He later became a doctor at the University of Vienna Children's Clinic under the tutelage of Franz Hamburger. It was here that Asperger began the work that would quite literally make his name. He published a postdoctoral thesis in 1944 entitled Autistic Psychopaths in Childhood. This paper was written while Austria was occupied by the Nazis in World War II. Now after the war, Hans Asperger used this paper to cultivate a heroic image of himself, using his work and his diagnosis to save children from the gas chambers. The severely disabled, incidentally, were among those exterminated by the Nazis during the Holocaust. This is an important point we'll come back to in just a minute. Now, in the 1970s, near the end of his life, Hans Asperger met with Lorna Wing, who founded the National Autistic Society here in the UK. Lorna Wing had done extensive research on autistic children who did not fit the classic description of autism developed by Leo Kanner, another Austrian scientist who later came to be based in America. Now, Lorna Wing read Hans Asperger's paper and found it matched the work she had been doing. So she arranged to meet Hans Asperger in the Maudsley Hospital in South London, where she was based. And during their meeting, although they disagreed on many aspects of autism, Wing was fascinated by Asperger's idea of an autism spectrum, where autistic people ranged from low functioning to high functioning. When Hans Asperger passed away, Lorna Wing presented a paper, Aspergers Syndrome, a clinical account, in 1981. The name of this paper was really just a professional courtesy, since it was really based on Wing's own work rather than that of Hans Asperger. Wing later regretted bringing Asperger's work to the English-speaking world in this way, and admitted shortly before her death that she wished she hadn't done it. She wanted to throw all labels away and look for a more dimensional approach. And indeed, the autism spectrum as we understand it today doesn't really go from low functioning to high functioning, but is a broad circle in which you get a different range of challenges and abilities. Nevertheless, the name Asperger's Syndrome caught on, and as autism awareness expanded over the next few decades, the image that came down was of Hans Asperger as a visionary doctor who saved innocent children from the murderous hands of the Nazis. The image exploded only a few years ago, in 2018, with the publication of a book, Asperger's Children, The Origins of Autism in Nazi Vienna, published by Edith Scheffer. This book demonstrated through thorough, documented research that Hans Asperger's concept of what became known as Asperger's Syndrome was heavily rooted in Nazi ideology. Now, Nazi ideology, as established by the author Edith Scheffer in her book, Nazi ideology was heavily based in eugenics, a scientific idea that disability and disordered thought can be removed from the human gene pool. The Nazis believed in an Aryan master race, and anything that did not fit in with that had to be identified and eliminated. In 1937, Hans Asperger argued against creating diagnoses for disabled or misfit children, arguing that the human mind was too elastic to fit into such rigid diagnoses. But when the Nazis annexed Austria in 1938, his views changed, and he started advocating labels and diagnoses for children using language that was increasingly judgmental and pejorative. It is telling that Asperger used the word psychopathy to describe his diagnosis. Psychopathy was a term in Nazi ideology that carried connotations of depravity and criminality, highly undesirable qualities. It was Lorna Wing who later adopted the more neutral term syndrome to describe Asperger's diagnosis. Now, to be part of Nazi society, or the Volk as it was called, you had to display Gemut, a German word loosely translated meaning social feeling. Now, that was what Hans Asperger and his peers were looking for in the children that crossed their paths. While Hans Asperger did indeed praise children whom he felt had talents or abilities that could be useful to the Volk, he was caustically dismissive of those children whom he felt could not contribute to society. These judgments had chilling consequences. It has been proven now that Hans Asperger signed papers transferring children from his clinic to Arndt Spiegelgrund, a notorious institution where children were put to death through poison or lethal injection. In 1942, Hans Asperger was on a 7-member commission that assessed the educability of children at Guggenheim Research Facility. In one day, this commission sent 35 children to Ernst-Spiegelgrund to be dispatched with a Jekyllius action, an order to kill. This was just the tip of the documented iceberg. Allowing for the fact that records have been lost over time, we will probably never know how many children Hans Asperger sent to their deaths. Now, Hans Asperger omitted this aspect of his work with the Third Reich after the war. It was fairly easy for him to do so, since he was never actually a Nazi Party member or someone who administered the executions. It has been suggested that he never really believed what he was saying about these children and only did so to advance his career within the Nazi Party. But whatever his motivations, he was clearly a part of the Nazis' child-killing apparatus and was never held accountable for his actions. So in light of this information, should we continue to use the term Asperger's Syndrome? Well, society is already in the process of moving on from it, and in the United States they no longer use the term in medical circles. However, it continues to be used here in the UK as well as further afield internationally. But even here we are in the process of moving on from the label, and some autistic social groups in the UK no longer use the term because of its historical context. It is worth remembering that medical labels, whatever their origins, merely describe a set of symptoms or behaviours. They do not describe a complete individual. Nevertheless, for support workers and other individuals who support autistic people, a diagnosis of autism can offer these people access to services and social groups that can help them live with the challenges of being autistic. The term Asperger's Syndrome isn't really needed anymore, and it was removed from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the DSM, several years ago. However, while medical circles and some autistic groups have moved on from using the term Asperger's Syndrome, more broadly speaking, it will take a longer time to move on from the label. There are many people out there who have been medically diagnosed or even self-diagnosed with Asperger's Syndrome who call themselves Aspies. I was in an autistic theatre group for a few years called Stealth Aspies, so I know how widespread the name is. These people have taken ownership of the label, and it has become part of their vocabulary and their social identity. This might take a little longer to evolve than the medical world. But whatever happens, as autism awareness continues to expand and evolve, the language of autism will do the same.